I live in Rock, Michigan. Right off of M35. About an hour and 50 minutes.
Welcome to our candidates and community forum. All candidates running for the 1st Congressional District seat were invited to participate today, and these were the 4 that accepted. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. A special thanks goes to the Menominee County Republicans and Democrats for hosting this event, and to the Menominee Area Public Schools for use of this site. At this time, please make sure your cell phones are off or in silent mode. Melissa Etch is our moderator, and she will be the person asking the questions, and she works at Radio Results Network.
All right, so here's the ground rules for the candidates. Be prepared to share your position ideas within the time allowed. Give your answer. Do not answer for how another candidate might answer. No personal attacks. Do not interrupt other candidates. And allow and respect other candidates' airtime. Share how the sporty timer and red and yellow cards work. Do you want to do that?
Oh, yeah. We got the timer, so I did a 30 second and 15 seconds. So I'll let you know.
And then some ground rules for the audience. Listen respectfully to the candidates. Please hold your applause till the end of questioning so that everyone can hear each candidate's response. We will have a meet and greet at the conclusion of the forum. We will start at 6 and end at 8, and 8:30 we'll vacate the building. And this is also being streamed on Facebook and will be available on YouTube afterwards. So, is everybody at the table? Justin, you're late. All right, so we're going to start off with everybody introducing themselves and tell us why you want to be represented in the U.S. Congress. And we're going to start with Zebulon. You've got 3 minutes. 3 minutes.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Cool. Hello, my name is Zebulon Favelli. I'm an electrician from Traverse City. Sorry, that's my rings. Apologies. I'd like to start with a quick question, actually. If everyone who feels like they've had to pay closer attention to politics lately could raise their hand. I'd love to see that. Okay. I see a lot of like-minded people. For a majority of my life, I've been somewhat distant from politics. I watched from a distance as government did its thing. I was focused on my life and my work. I was climbing wind turbines, cross-country skiing, playing soccer, mountain biking. But today, things are a little different. Today it feels required, necessary even, to pay close attention just to feel confident that the government is working for us. The past year alone, I've consumed more political content and news than the previous 18 years of my life combined. And
You said 3 minutes, right?
Yeah, 8 minutes.
yes.
Cycling twice.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. So I attended rallies, I joined protests, and talked to neighbors and friends of mine. And even through all that, I felt like it wasn't enough. So I asked myself, can I do more? How can I help this system that so many people feel disconnected from. And eventually I found the answer was simple. I needed to step forward. So, I'm here. My name is Zebulon Featherly. I'm running for U.S. House of Representatives as an independent because I believe that we deserve leadership that is transparent, grounded, and accountable to the people. I fully believe that we can strengthen our health and education system while making sure that it works for everyday people. I believe that we can work towards energy independence while embracing safe and responsible technological innovation. I believe we can rebuild trust in the government by embracing transparency, limiting outside influence, and making sure people can understand how the government works. As an independent, my responsibility isn't to a party, it's to the people of this district. That's why I'm here.
Somebody else, Justin?
Perfect. Everybody hear me okay? Great. As I sit here, I have a smile on my face, and the reason that I have a smile on my face is because I'm thinking about the first time that I actually heard about this event. I got a phone call from one of the people that were trying to organize the event as this first started, and they said to me, Justin, would you be interested in coming and having a forum? And I said, what organization are you with? And he told me, and while he's talking to me and kind of doing my research, and I looked at it, he said, would you like to come to Menominee and have this event with us? And I said, I need to think about that for a second. And I thought about it, and I'm like, you want me to essentially volunteer my time, drive 400 miles on a Monday night to sit in a room full of Democrats and get my ass handed to me for 2 hours in a debate? And I was laughing about that, and I thought about it, and I said, absolutely. This is going to be a great opportunity to be able to hear some diverse perspectives. But as I sit here and I smile and I think about this, that's not what happened. The community got together, they reached out to the other side, they said, hey, we'd love to have some Republican support, let's have some dialogue, let's open up some decency in our community and bring people together. And that's exactly what my campaign is about. My slogan is bridging the divides. And that's what we need in this country. We need the ability to be able to sit in a room full of people with differing views and perspectives and have conversations. And they need to be meaningful, and they need to be supportive of bringing ideas to the surface that benefit all Americans in this country. And I'm proud to be here in attendance with you, and I'm happy that you're here participating, because this shows exactly what needs to happen in order for our communities to thrive and for us to bring prosperity back to our community. So I want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come out this evening on a Monday night, show your support, show your interest, and allow us to sit here and have discussions that are meaningful to you. So thank you so much, and thank you to those who have served in our country for being present.
We're standing on the edge of history, mere steps away from our nation's 250th anniversary, where our forefathers risked their lives by signing the Declaration of Independence, declaring our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Since that time, more than 1.3 million Americans have given their lives to defend that document and our freedoms. So the question before us is, will we honor their sacrifice? Because from where I'm standing, we've never been closer to losing those freedoms than we are today. Not from the threat of a foreign power, but from rot and corruption within. My name is Wayne Stiles. I'm running for Congress here in Michigan's 1st Congressional District because I will not stand by and watch as our democracy is being chipped away. Like you, I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Bill of Rights. And I believe in a government that should work for everyday people, not just the rich and powerful. But let's be honest with ourselves. This next election is not going to be simply about red hats or blue ties. It's going to be a choice between two fundamentally very different versions of America, where one path leads to authoritarian rule, where one man feels he's above the law, unencumbered by a pliant Congress, where Supreme Court justices are literally tying themselves into knots to give this man more power. Federal forces donning masks are trampling our civil liberties. Monies appropriated by Congress for our well-being are being held leveraged for one man's power. The other path, democracy, a system of checks and balances, a government of laws, not men, a constitution that's there to protect us all, a system of government that has guided us through war, depression, division, and made us the greatest military and economic power on earth. That's the path I choose. I choose to believe in Michigan. I choose to fight for our democracy. I choose to fight for everyday hardworking Americans, and I choose to fight for restoring the American dream for our loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. It really means a lot to have people here and willing to watch this kind of forum. I think it's important for our democracy. I think it's important for our discourse to heal the divides that have grown between us as neighbors. My name is Kyle Blomquist. I was born and raised in the Upper Peninsula. I'm from Iron Mountain. I'm an architect by trade. I actually own a small firm downtown Iron Mountain with my wife. But the reason why I'm here is because I've seen our material conditions here in the Upper Peninsula, throughout northern Michigan, and really throughout the country, deteriorating the better part of my life. That I've seen systems that are built not on care, not on service to the public, but on profit for a few. And I've seen how those corrosive effects have affected all my neighbors, regardless of how they vote. I see that too often our government prioritizes violence at home and violence abroad against our basic needs. Now, my foundational belief as a candidate, as a person, is that our basic needs should be treated as human rights. That extends to healthcare, housing, a dignified lifestyle as a worker, as well as safety to all human beings. That materializes in my support for Medicare for All, housing first policy, including removing the investment of private equity from our communities that price us out of our own homes. That includes passing living wages for all American workers, paid time off for all American workers, and expanding Social Security to give our seniors a dignified retirement, a safe, comfortable retirement. And because I believe that safety is a human right and humanity is universal, I call for an end of the genocide in Gaza, end to U.S. support for the state of Israel, and now an end to our escalating warfare in Iran. And because I care about the safety of my neighbors, regardless of the color of their skin or what their citizenship status is, I call for the abolition of ICE. I believe that we need to start treating our neighbors as neighbors and allies in the working class. Throughout tonight, I'll be answering your questions to the best of my ability, but my feeling is this: I don't care who you voted for in the last election or the election before that. If you sell some of your finite time on this earth for $1, if you stop at any point and you slide into destitution and this system abuses you and forgets you, then you're of the American working class. And you're of the 90% in this country. And you're my ally. So thank you again for coming out, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, we'll get started with the questions. We're going to start with Justin. What specific actions would you take in Congress to lower the cost of living for families in this rural district, particularly regarding healthcare, housing, energy costs, and wages?
I think that we have to look at what's driving those costs and indicators, and the first thing that comes to mind is our deficit spending. We have got to get spending under control. We're bleeding and hemorrhaging money into the system, and it's devaluing the dollar and the currency, which is causing prices to increase, wages to go up. And if we don't control our spending in Congress, if we actually don't take the time to sit down and look at some of the wasteful fraud and abuse or the access spending that we have, the wasteful spending, we don't get that under control, we're going to continue to see inflation rise. We're going to continue to see costs increase for hardworking Americans, especially in our district. So my support comes from championing the idea and perspectives of building coalitions that really want to address our national deficit, our deficit spending. It's working with people who are willing to fight the good fight and look for areas that we can cut expenditures. And although that's a difficult task because it requires us to make difficult decisions, it's something that's necessary for our country to thrive and be prosperous.
I think if you want to talk about lowering costs for us with housing and the economy, one of the main things that we really have to do is realize that this is not about left versus right anymore. This is about hardworking Americans needing to claw back some of the resources that have been funneled to the ultra-billionaires of this country. So almost every question probably that we're going to talk about tonight, in my mind, goes back to exactly this question is, how are we going to increase the livelihood of the middle class and still also be able to balance our budget, reduce our multi-trillion-dollar deficit? If I was going to talk about one thing, maybe housing is a major issue here. The median home income is like $63,000. That means the average family can realistically afford a $175,000 house. The reality is, in new construction now, for a modest 1,100 square foot house, they cost $275,000 to $350,000. And it's just unaffordable. So as a member of Congress, what I would work towards is working on federal policies that give grants to people to buy homes, that help rejuvenate neighborhoods, and other policies like that.
I think you start by addressing the way that we pay for healthcare in this country, or don't pay for it. The United States of America is the only developed nation in the world that does not provide universal health care to its citizens, and I think this should stop. That's why I support Medicare for All. And Medicare for All, what is under-discussed or underrepresented in our media is that the prediction is that between $400,000 and $600,000, or between $400 and $600 billion would come off our books, that we would save that into the American people. And we would also save 60 to 70,000 lives a year. That's a tremendous amount of resources and human potential that we can devote elsewhere. So I support Medicare for All. I support sound housing policy, including forcing private equity to divest from single-family residences. That would repatriate a lot of housing back to the American working class in communities like ours, where they have since priced us out, and it would allow us to grow household wealth. And I support universal living wages and paid time off for all American workers. That you should not have an employer be able to game the system and be able to take away your livelihood or your vitality so that they can spend it on stock buybacks. And instead, I want those wages, those living wages, spent in our communities supporting our small businesses.
I'd like to briefly talk about the energy part of this situation, since it's been fairly covered the rest of it. Currently, we subsidize oil and gas as an energy source. Now, those energy sources are very expansive to build, they're very expensive to build, and you cannot just put one on a property. What I would love to see is for subsidies to be removed from oil and gas and be moved towards solar and wind, which you can install those on homes. You can install them on roofs. And we're already to a point where solar and wind are cheaper than oil and gas and nuclear. So it doesn't make any sense for us to be wasting taxpayer money subsidizing these sources when we have other options. I also support a government-funded healthcare system. There is no reason that our healthcare should be profitable to certain people when we pay so much for it. Housing as well. There's a lot of money being... Yeah, I'll just cut off there. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start with Wayne. As more people struggle to afford health insurance, what policies would you support to keep hospitals, especially rural hospitals, financially viable and open?
So in regards to healthcare, access, cost, freedom are important things that we have to discuss. Rural hospitals are in decline because they are not seen as profit centers. When they close a rural hospital, you have long travel distances, which can be dangerous. We are watching as our premiums are rising, but they're not keeping up, but they're going well above what we're getting in wage increases. So when it comes to healthcare, what I think needs to happen is we already have a system set up, but what we need is we're missing the key linchpin to that system, which was integrating the public option into the Affordable Health Care Act, which allows the government to use its buying power to offer healthcare insurance. I'm not saying that we need to get rid of people's healthcare insurance, so if you have a program that you like, you stay on it. But we use the federal government's buying power to lower costs and make things more competitive. And they need to do the same thing with drug price negotiations. And the biggest thing is we need to divorce our healthcare from our employer.
You know, Medicare for All is silver bullet in a lot of ways. It doesn't cover everything, but it does a lot. One of the most important things it does is, I'm from Iron Mountain. I understand what it's like in places like Menominee to be a border city or a border community. Understanding that in the Upper Peninsula, you're surrounded by Great Lakes, and you're surrounded by that Wisconsin-Michigan border that represents the edge of your healthcare network. And now, as Blue Cross Blue Shield is negotiating largely in bad faith with University of Michigan healthcare systems, then they're risking of also taking those community clinics offline. And so Medicare for All, a large component of it that's under-discussed is the fact that now we have removed those artificial barriers to care. And if you're an hour and a half away from a good specialized care down in Green Bay, Wisconsin, you can do that without doubling your family maximum out of pocket. The other thing that we have to do outside of Medicare for All is understand exactly why our healthcare system in rural America closed. Because the profit motive has not been satisfied. Now, my feeling is instead of the state of Michigan trying to throw extra money at a company like Aspirus to try to keep a labor and delivery department open in Ironwood, we should be opening a public clinic, a publicly run and operated clinic, for those communities that private corporations have deemed non-profitable enough, because we still need the care.
Small towns truly do they have a worst when it comes to availability of any type of resource that isn't profitable. Because if you don't have the population, you can't profit off of it. And that's why I'm against for-profit industries like the current insurance system we have right now. I am fully in support of a federal single-payer medical insurance agency, and whether or not that's the Medicare for all, like Kyle was talking about, I'm not as confident, but I do think that we should convert ourselves over to a single-payer system.
We currently spend $1.7 trillion annually in healthcare in this country. What was deemed to be the Affordable Care Act is no longer affordable for most Americans in this country. Next year, we're on track to spend $2 trillion, and this process has shown that the more the government gets involved in healthcare, the more expensive healthcare becomes to the people who actually use the services that it provides. Unfortunately, because it's law, Congress doesn't have the ability to appropriate more money. It's a maximum or mandatory spend on the taxpayer. The only healthcare legislation or appropriations that congressional members are able to vote on are the federally qualified healthcare centers, or FQHCs. And we have a lot of those in our communities. They serve the underprivileged individuals that are here. And that budget's roughly $18 billion annually. Although I'm fiscally conservative, I would definitely support adding more to those appropriations, because those people are serving the people who are underserved in our community. If you get an opportunity to go out and meet anybody that works at the FQHCs, they're really doing a great job, and they're regulated in a way and such that they have to report much differently than hospitals do that are for-profit. So please take the time, if you get the opportunity, to go out and support your FQHCs and get to know about what they do.
Hey, Kyle, Social Security and Medicare trust funds are projected to face shortfalls within the next 15 years. What is your plan to ensure long-term sustainability for people depending on them?
I'll address Social Security first, is that we need to uncap Social Security tax. That right now in our country, I think that after your earnings, after I believe it's around $170,000, are no longer taxed. That means that the wealthiest in our country functionally pay nothing into the Social Security system, even though that has a direct impact on their workforce. The workforce that they require to grow their billions and billions of dollars. So first, we uncap Social Security tax. And then when you talk about something like Medicare, Medicare for All takes everybody who is right now paying private health insurance premiums and they move them into the pool with the rest of Medicare recipients. Right now, Medicare recipients, people that are 65 and older, those are the most costly members of our society. And so you move the healthier people into a pool with the costlier members, and you flatten the playing field there, and you fund that system in perpetuity. And then the last thing you do, the most important thing that you do right now, is you tax the ultra wealthy. You tax their gains, and you tax their accumulated wealth, because that's ultimately our wealth. That was wealth that was withheld from us in our compensation. And that will both fund the things that we need, but it will also address other affordability concerns on the ground. Because when you have functionally infinite money, all you can do is invest it and outcompete the working class.
The amount of difference in between the wealth of someone like myself and the top of the wealth chain right now is so staggeringly vast that I have a hard time comprehending the difference. To understand what you could accomplish with the amount of money that some people within this country have accumulated is mind-boggling. And the fact that they are not paying the same percentage as the rest of us on some of these, like Social Security. Like Kyle was saying, there's a cap so that people who are making so much no longer have to, pay that percentage. I think that that is ridiculous, and I see no reason that people with that much wealth can't pay more for, the same percentage as the rest of us.
Sure. Okay, Social Security and Medicare trust funds are projected to face shortfalls within the next 15 years. What is your plan to ensure long-term sustainability for people depending on them?
It's a lot sooner than that. It's actually, we're going to run out of funds by 2033, which it was 2034, but with some of the tax cuts, they bumped that down to 2033. So it's inevitable, and it's a cliff. Now, interesting, when I started doing research on this, I actually built some models to try to see what I could do in order to change that, and I could only get it funded to 50%. And I did what Kyle said. I removed the income tax and changed some of the barriers. I even pushed the retirement age to 80 years old just to see what I could do. And I could only get to 50%, which is alarming and concerning. So I realized at that point that I wasn't smart enough to solve this problem by myself. So one of the things that I would strongly suggest is that we start getting people together that are experts in these fields and have discussions and conversations now about the inevitable shortfalls that we're about to experience. And that's going to require a lot of people to come on board. And for some reason, unbeknownst to me, probably because of re-elections, no one wants to bring this up. Because a lot of the voting base are people who are on Social Security right now. And they look at those things as a scare tactic, because if I'm to tell you honestly that there's a good chance that your Social Security benefits will expire even though you paid into it your whole life, there's going to be some havoc in this country.
I think a lot of those questions kind of directly respond back to, should we privatize these systems? And, we paid in out of our checks to fund this entire system. We're always being told that we can't have nice things for our country and for the people who have worked their entire lives and paid into the system. So we can't have health care, we can't have affordable prescriptions, we can't have a safe retirement, but we have an unlimited checkbook for war. And we need to really start drawing some of that money back that we think that we're going to spend on our military, and we need to start investing it into the people in this country. I don't think anybody wants to keep raising taxes to pay for more programs, but what we really need to do is get in there and make sure that we're spending our money effectively and that we have clear oversight and transparency on all the programs. I also believe that we need to uncap the Social Security tax. That's a huge revenue source. It's set up for very few people in the United States to take advantage of it, and they're massively taking advantage of it. We need to have a wealth tax. Money that's held in one family forever and is never taxed because they have all these systems set up to not have to pay and then just pass this generational wealth on to their children is not putting any money back into the economy.
All right, Zedlon. The First Amendment states that Congress shall neither establish religion nor prohibit its free exercise. How should this principle be applied in practice today?
I believe the separation of church and state is a very sacred thing for our country. We are a country of many people, many nationalities, many different cultures. And I think that ensuring that that stays that way is the best way to keep our country what it is, as great as it is. I think just ensuring that we keep that separation is the best way to go about it.
Considering the fact that the United States of America was established on religious core values, Judeo-Christian values, I think we've done a great job of establishing the separation between church and state, mainly because a lot of the individuals that came here originally were persecuted in their countries for having different religious beliefs. And of course, there were times in our country where we persecuted people for their religious beliefs, and in some ways, shape, and form, that still happens to this day. And it's unfortunate. It's not as prevalent, probably, as it once was. I think religion is on the decline, which is terrifying, in a sense, especially Christian beliefs in this country. I think that if people gravitated more to understanding religion in its purity, in the simplest form, that our country would be a better place. There are a lot of great values in many different religions that teaches people how to be kind and considerate, to care about our neighbors, to go do good deeds for people, to do God's work. And I think that a lot of those systems have disappeared because of politics and because of government. So it's up to us as people in our communities to uphold those values and to push our government away from trying to take away the very freedoms in religion that we want to possess and keep.
Could you repeat the question? I just want to hear one detail.
The First Amendment states that Congress shall neither establish religion nor prohibit its free exercise. How should this principle be applied in practice today?
Thank you. So it's more of a question about religion and not the other tenets of the First Amendment. Okay, so I'm a practicing Catholic. I'm probably the most left-leaning Catholic in my pew. And what I see happening is, with the separation of church and state, not only does it weaken the state when we start bringing religion in to run the government, but it also weakens religion itself. So if we decide that we're going to, once the two systems start intermingling with each other and playing off of each other, they're basically doing themselves a disservice. I think what we have is another issue here, and it's this resurgence in Christian white nationalism that's starting to rear its ugly head again. It's trying to put one group of people in front of the other group of people, and then slowly trying to chip away at everybody else's rights for their own personal gain. And they're using Christianity as a way to bolster their own, evil doing. And, I'm really against that. Being a Christian myself, I find it really disgusting.
I believe that we should not be interjecting religion into our schools, into our public schools. Luckily, the state of Michigan does not do that, but other places in the country that is allowed, that is, in fact, encouraged. The location of the Ten Commandments in public school, for instance. I don't think that that is necessary. I don't think that benefits anybody, and I don't think that that is in keeping with the First Amendment in terms of how it dictates religion be kept out of our politics. I also believe that if we are going to actually treat this as if it is that we're trying to keep religion wholly out of our governmental processes, that means that we do not let a specific religious morality dictate how we provide the availability of reproductive care, or how we judge who can marry whom in this country, or what somebody's gender identity is, or whether or not, whether or not we as a government start to speak to people who are perhaps deploying to Iran or potentially deploying to Iran about the biblical mandate behind their mission. There is so much that we have allowed to kind of penetrate into our government from a Christian nationalist agenda, and I think that that should be removed entirely. I think that if we are trying to provide an ample opportunity and environment for all religions, then we need to remove a preference for one.
Justin, do you believe the rise of Christian nationalism poses a threat to the First Amendment? Why or why not?
You know, I've never been asked this question. It doesn't come up in any of my circles. I don't see Christian nationalism as being a factor in the divisions that we have in this country. I think people want to have faith in something in this country. They want to have a belief. And when your institutions are failing you, and when you lose trust in the institutions that are supposed to protect you, people gravitate towards religion. You've seen this throughout centuries. People want to have purpose in their life. They want to identify as something. They want to be something more than just a finite being on the planet. And people gravitate to religion. In this country, Christians have done amazing things. As a Christian myself, I go out every day trying to do what we consider to be God's work, being able to speak to people, inspire people to be better, to look deeper into things, try to challenge the norms and the systems, but do it in good faith. You try to be caring and considerate and compassionate, even when people disagree or don't want to have the same beliefs as you. When I look at Christians in this country, I think that they're the backbone of our existence. And so I don't see that this is an issue. If you're talking about fundamental Christian radicals, then yeah, there's radicals everywhere in all religions, but I don't think Christians are the problem in this country.
I think I was fairly clear on my last response of what I think about Christian white nationalism in this country. I think it's doing a huge disservice to every American out there, including the people who are fully pressing this issue. I don't have a lot more to add to that, except for I think it's a huge mistake that we give this kind of spotlight on people who are really, in my opinion, are not really following the American values of this country.
Can you repeat the question, please?
All right. Do you believe the rise of Christian nationalism poses a threat to the First Amendment? Why or why not?
You know, it's difficult because obviously I can speak to the what I see as perhaps corrosive effects within, our personal liberties or the way our government might function around Christian nationalism when it's imposed in that regard. When I look at Christian nationalism as an ideology, we have to acknowledge that the First Amendment also protects that speech. So white Christian nationalists, even though I might disagree with them, they have the right to practice that. Just like I would want my Muslim brothers and sisters to be able to practice their religion, or Jewish brothers and sisters to be able to practice theirs. It really isn't until that starts to become the operating modality of our government and starts to infringe upon the First Amendment rights and freedom of religious rights of other religions that becomes a problem. And so when I look at our government in particular, I think that there is a tendency to normalize, say, Islamophobia. And I disagree with that. But if you're asking me specifically around white Christian nationalism, then I find it difficult to say that is inherently a First Amendment issue, because it really isn't until that becomes a governmental policy. Outside of governmental policy, they have the right to practice that as long as it doesn't endanger others.
No religion on its own is inherently bad or endangers anything. It is when those religious people affect others in their community and in their surroundings that it comes into question. So the existence of Christian nationalism, I would say, does not threaten the First Amendment on its own. However, if some beliefs within that system start to affect the people and the communities around them, that is when it becomes a threat to the First Amendment.
Okay, Wayne, do you support requiring federal law enforcement agencies to follow the same rules as state and local police regarding identification, badges or body cameras, warrants, and use of force standards? Why or why not?
So this sounds like a ICE question. My position on what we see happening out there is I believe that we need to protect our borders, and I believe that we need, we need these agencies in place since 9/11. However, what has currently happened is we've had a hijacking of that institution. We've put an unprecedented amount of our federal dollars into that program. We've lowered the training standards. We've put people in positions with weapons that are basically military grade, and we see these forces, are playing this cosplay military system. I think that's a disgrace. I believe that there needs to be government oversight with ICE and Homeland Security. I believe that we need to have body cams, that we need to make sure we have judicial warrants, that we have get rid of this paramilitary gear that they're wearing, remove the mask, have clear identification. They're supposed to be here to protect Americans. Yes, we need to protect our borders, but you can clearly see from what's happening out there that it's more than that.
I do believe that our federal law enforcement should be operating by a similar standard or a higher standard than we expect from our local police. That includes body cameras, unmasking, showing your identification, having actual judicial warrants, operating within the bounds of the law, and then also having accountability. But I would extend it further, and I would say that whether that be local law enforcement or federal law enforcement, that we need to remove these qualified immunity standards that allow our law enforcement to brutalize our citizenry with no accountability. They should be held to a higher standard, not a lower standard, than a mall cop. That we should be allowing our society to police those that police us, to make sure that there is a fairness in the way that they operate, both at the local level and the federal level. And when it comes to ICE, I do not believe that what we should be doing is pumping more money into them for body cameras and their identification and those sorts of things. What I think we should be doing relative to ICE is we should be abolishing it. The last year that we had the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Services, under the DOJ, that organization had a $4 billion budget. Now that it's no longer operating under the Department of Justice and is operating under the Department of Homeland Security, that budget has grown and grown and grown in the $75 to $85 billion range, similar to what we spend on housing.
I fully support transparency in any agency, whether it's federal or local. I also support a strong sense of accountability. We cannot allow individuals, just because they are within the federal area, to get away with, to be unaccountable for their actions. Especially when it comes to American citizens. I'm right there with Kyle. I think we need to hold, especially federal agency, to a higher standard than local. And I think it's clear right now that that is not happening.
I believe that agencies should have the autonomy to make the proper set of standards for their departments based on their jurisdictional factors. I mean, we look at policing in different ways, I think, in our communities versus in our counties versus at the state level and at the federal level. And unfortunately for the law enforcement community, there's been factions of our country that has demonized being in law enforcement. And we forget that these individuals are called to serve us in our worst times. And they're constantly being exposed to traumas and other factors that we, the people, rarely get to experience. Obviously, no one is above the law. We have a set of standards and laws in this country everyone needs to adhere to. Law enforcement is no different. But when you start to set basic standards, then standards and conditions that should be met in certain communities or at the federal level often get overlooked because it's blanket. And when you have the autonomy and the ability to set those standards that fit your jurisdiction, then there's a lot more oversight and understanding. So I think sometimes when we say things emotionally, it gets us fired up in terms of how we're going to support or what certain agencies should do. Agencies should set the policies and standards that are best for them.
Okay, Kyle, when your party's pressure, your personal conscience, and the views of your constituents conflict, what principles or criteria will you guide how you vote?
You know, this is a good question for me because I graduated from high school in 2004 in Dickinson County, and when I did, I was a Republican. As I left into the world, my views changed. That's not a value judgment; it's just a reality. And so, when I stopped calling myself a Republican, when I stopped considering myself a Republican, one thing I didn't do, believe it or not, is I didn't start calling myself a Democrat. I became very distrustful of a system that has been used as a wedge between me and my neighbors, has been used to obscure my shared humanity and my common cause with fellow members of the American working class. So while I am running as a Democrat, I personally couldn't care less about this partisanship. It really is a barrier more than anything. And so I have actually called, I've said numerous times on the record, and you can look on the internet, is I would not support Hakeem Jeffries as the leader of the Democrats in the House if I was elected. I believe that we need to do better for the American working class, that should be our North Star, that we should not try to gauge what's popular and accept injustice and equity along the way. I think that we should set our North Star at justice and equity, and that we should work to make that popular. And so I'm always, always, always going to legislate on behalf of my neighbors, not the party.
This was a good question for you, Kyle, but it was a great question for me. As an independent, I have no party. I have no obligation to any party leadership, and I'm only accountable to my own morals and the people of this district. If there's a significant majority on a topic and I disagree, I have to remember that I am a representative of the people. And I think keeping that in mind is going to be very important moving forwards. But like I said before, I have no party, and that makes that decision fairly easy for me.
I'm a Republican, and I have conservative values, and that means a great deal to me. I've been raised in a Republican home. I have over 100 years of Republican heritage in my family. But when you're elected to Congress, you're elected to represent people, not your own views or your own positions or your own agenda. I've told people from the start, please have a seat at the table. Let's have discussions. Let's have a conversation. Let's figure out what's best for Americans. And it's difficult because a lot of those conversations are tough because we have inherent bias and we have our own ideas of how things should be done or how things work. But the reality is when you are elected as a representative, you're elected to represent the views of the people. And although sometimes it's hard to get everybody together to make a decision on that, I hope to be able to do it. I hope to be able to reach out to my constituents when these big omnibus bills come in and say, is this what you want? How do you want me to vote? What's important to you? And hopefully you'll respond and you'll be proactive and you'll say, this is what I want to do. Become more informed. The problem is we elect people into Congress and we expect them just to vote. But we don't give them any insight on how you want them to vote or why they should vote a certain way. And a lot of times those representatives don't tell you what they're voting on. So look at this as an opportunity to elect somebody that's going to give you a voice and listen to what you have to say before making their decision.
So as your congressman, I want you to know that I fully feel like it is not left versus right. We need to make decisions that make lives better for everyday hardworking Americans. And that's my number one goal and the main reason that I'm running for Congress. The way that I'm going to do that is, not only what I feel is my personal grounding of morals, but my career as an industrial designer, product designer, lends me to look scientifically at problems where we see what the issue is, and then you develop solutions, you execute that solution, and then you monitor and test it against what you thought the parameters were and find out if it's working for you. And if it's not, then you have to be able to step back and say, we need to correct course of this ship. And then you just need to do it. And you have to do this over and over and over again with every policy and just keep going back and going, are we making life better for the American people and the people that are in our districts?
All right, second line. Congress controls federal spending. Should any branch of government be allowed to withhold congressionally approved funds as a political tool or for any reason? Why or why not?
No part of the government should be able to withhold funds from other parts of the government. I briefly remember seeing a news article that was talking about disaster relief funds being withheld from certain regions, and it was said that the news article I read was saying that it was politically motivated. I think that is a disingenuous approach, and it's not one that I will ever be supportive, and it's not an approach that I will ever support. And I believe that using funding as a lever is not a moral way to go about it.
I've been sitting here trying to figure out exactly where this question's coming from and how it's pivoting, so I'm going to use this opportunity to discuss the partial government shutdown that we're facing right now in the United States. And it's mainly because two law enforcement officers have done something that the public eye has taken hold of. And we won't get into the specifics about that, but we can discuss the fallout from it. So currently there's a branch of our government's Department of Homeland Security that's being affected. And who does that affect? It affects the TSA officers, it affects Border Patrol agents, it protects, or goes after custom and border protection, some Secret Service personnel, FEMA, and Coast Guard members. And it's being used as a political tool to get change in an agency that has been conducting raids and operations throughout the United States to enforce our immigration laws. And it's a concern because by doing this, it doesn't make our country any safer. And those people right now go to work every day because they're essential employees, but they don't get paid. And they have bills that they need to cover, and they have responsibilities and obligations that put their lives at risk every day to defend us and protect us. And that's not right. We shouldn't be doing this, and we definitely shouldn't use politics in order to make a point.
So money's appropriated by Congress. It's already hard enough to get these appropriations through and get both sides to agree on them and get the money to the states where it belongs. Holding that money hostage and leveraging it for one person's political gain to vindictively, make a retribution against their perceived enemies, I find goes against everything I believe in and what I expect the United States to be and how we are expected to operate. Just because somebody has the power to do something like that, doesn't make it right. It might doesn't make right. And that's basically all I have to say on that.
Congress has the power of the purse. They're going to allocate funds, and those allocations are part of deliberation and bipartisan efforts across the aisle, across two chambers of Congress, and are ultimately signed into law by the President of the United States of America. So when those appropriations are ultimately forgone or withheld based on how those agencies themselves decide to operate autonomously, then it puts our communities in jeopardy. When we decide that, despite appropriations, we're going to brick the Department of Education, that affects our students. When we do the same with our environmental protections and our national parks, that affects Americans. And so if we are going to believe that Congress has any say in this, has any power, if we believe that we have representation in our government, then that representation needs to be bore out in the way that our government spends the money that they have been assigned to spend, and not withhold, especially not on strictly partisan grounds. And there is a difference between there being a budgetary fight around the DHS in Congress right now that's led to a limited shutdown. There's a difference between that and funds that have been agreed upon by both sides, have been provided, and then are just not used out of spite.
Okay, Justin. The Citizens United decision allows unlimited campaign spending by wealthy donors, corporations, etc. Would you support legislation or a constitutional amendment to overturn or limit this ruling? Why or why not?
I don't think any one of us up here like the Citizens United's ruling by the Supreme Court. It puts grassroots candidates or candidates that are getting in that don't have the financial means at an extreme disadvantage to run for public office. And you can obviously tell that when people put money into politicians, then certain things change and decisions can be different than maybe what you would make if you weren't getting those contributions. One of the things that we have to realize in this is the fact that it was a Supreme Court ruling. So that means that someone argued that their position wasn't there, and the Supreme Court eventually heard it and said that corporations have a voice under constitutional protection. And I think that's very difficult to address or engage in, because then you're trying to go against the Constitution of the United States. I think the only way to do that is for someone to bring forth another lawsuit or go go into some legal action to try to argue a different perspective in hopes that it gets reheard and another decision can be made. One thing that's concerning about money in politics is, in a simple form, and I'll try to say this as quickly as possible, whenever someone gives you a large sum of money and they're not your family or a deep friend, you feel obligated to make sure that that's recovered or recouped. And I think that puts us in a vulnerable position as politicians.
Money appears to be the root of all issues here with many of these questions. In regards to Citizens United, our democracy should not be for sale, and that is basically what has happened since Citizens United. It has allowed unlimited funding to go into campaigns, and as Justin said, all the candidates that you see before you here today are not independently wealthy. Someone asked me earlier at the entrance, like, what have you figured out since you've been running for Congress? And one of the things that I thought of is I should have been a lawyer, or I should have had financial donors willing to bring hundreds of thousands of dollars to my campaign before I even started, because that's really what it takes to win an election. So we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. Billionaires and super PACs are dominating our elections, and we need full disclosure of political funding. You see Jack Bergman in the news. He had one of his donors, families donated $280,000 to his campaign from California, not even from our states. We got money flooding into our race particularly, so we don't even have the chance to defend the people are here. We need to ban congressional stock trading. We need stronger lobbying rules. We need the voices of voters must outweigh the power of money, and democracy should not be for sale.
I support a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United. I don't think that there's anybody at this table, from the sounds of it, that disagrees with that. How do we get there? It's a massively popular position, regardless of whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican. So why isn't it being proposed en masse? Why doesn't it have massive support? It's because everybody, a large majority of both parties that are in Congress right now, benefit from Citizens United decision. And I will go further, and I will say actually the worst effects, as far as I'm concerned, of Citizens United are not that because they allow the Republican side to out-fundraise and out-compete the Democratic side. I think the worst effects of Citizens United are felt in deep blue districts, in the way that those same Republican donors, those same billionaires participate in Democratic Party primaries and ensure that by the time you get to November, that decision has already been made. And so I believe that the best way to undermine that process begins here, and it gives you agency in this process. That you need to reject those that would not reject that money. The same people who are taking money from Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and AIPAC, like Jack Bergman, should not have your support. Look for other candidates. Every dollar that you give to those candidates, all you're doing is you are subsidizing some billionaire's ownership of your representation.
The short answer, I do support overturning Citizens United, like the rest of us. Long answer, people forget that corporations are groups of people. Those people within those corporations already have the ability to donate to people on the campaign trail, just like the rest of us. There's no reason that certain individuals should have more power than the rest of us. I agree with Wayne here. He's brought up transparency a little bit. On my campaign, on my website, I have a page dedicated to transparency. I think it's super important that we can easily have access to information in regards to where people are getting their donations from and what they're doing with it.
Hey, Wayne. Broadcast media were once required to present balanced viewpoints, while cable and social media are not. Should all media regulations be reconsidered? If so, how would you like to see them change?
I'm not even sure if I was alive when it was balanced media coverage. That's not true, but that wasn't something that we thought about. I think with the advent of 24-hour cable news has really been almost like, it was like the starting point of the downfall of getting, accurate news information, because it became a money game, and it became like the Entertainment Tonight, or of the modern age. Shock value is what sells money, or it's what sells, and it brings in the money. So if you follow the New York Times, they were going to give you their views on the most hottest items out there. However, they also write a lot of beautiful articles on just great things that are happening around the world. They get no support because people are pre-programmed as human beings to look for the next danger in their life. So we are addicted to this constant bombardment from our media. And so I think it's more than just a question about whether we need fair representation, and it's more like we need to have a real conversation in this country on our addiction to social media.
I think ultimately you're talking about the difference between a publicly funded, publicly operated public service in the information, the informing of the electorate, the informing of the population as we used to know it, and what our news media is now. It's 24 hours, it's entertaining, that there is a level of deniability there that we've seen exploited by multiple news sources. And what I tell people is this, is that do not believe that you are not subject to propaganda. Whether you're watching CNN or Fox News, OAN, or MSNBC, you are subjected to some low-grade propaganda. You need to harden yourself against that. And that means that we need to be reflective about where we're getting those news sources, what news sources we're using, and be doing our best, being as diligent as possible. But this expectation that we're going to be balanced on every single network, every single medium, I think is unrealistic. And how you police that is almost impossible in the internet age. Because what you're talking about is almost partisan. The only way that you could actually narrow it down, there could be on a number of issues, nearly infinite positions that you would have to platform. But if you're just looking for the Democratic mainstream position or the Republican mainstream position, that narrows it down, but it also excludes a lot.
Broadcast media were once required to present balanced viewpoints, while cable and social media are not. Should all media regulations be reconsidered? If so, how would you like to see them change?
Thank you. Personally, I would love to see anything that is labeled as a news system, whether it's a talk show or a large channel, anything that is labeled as news needs to be held to a higher standard. They need to offer equal viewpoints. If they're going to bring up a subject, they need to allow opportunity for the other side of the argument to have a voice. I don't think that this should apply to smaller media sources and anything that's not labeling itself as a news source. I think trying to apply that type of system to everyone, it would make a lot of hassle for little everyone.
I believe in the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States. If you guys want to have the freedom to watch whatever news source you want, any opinion-based news, listen to any radio station, whatever, you should be free to make those choices. If you want to hear an opposing side, change the channel. If you want your car and listen to something, you can do that. If you want to be single-minded, that's your choice. If you want to be complex in your decision-making and try to get as many news sources as possible, you can do that too. And if you want to run down rabbit holes, go ahead. I'm not going to ever stand up and say, I think that CNN should have a block of Republican-based material, although I think that they're merging with a company that's supported by Republicans, so that may change. So I'll have to say MSNBC in my next debate. But the consideration is this: you guys have the choice to listen and watch whatever it is that you want to watch, and I support that. When you have people that are on podcasts and you have people that are on platforms for social media, it's really hard because that infinite amount of people that you have to regulate, and then it starts coming to, if you have an opinion that's different than someone's, you have to give equal amount of time. No one wants to do that. Go out there, say what you want to say, listen to what you want to listen to, do what you want to do. If you want to go do the research, do it, and if you don't, that's fine.
Okay, Kyle. Given recent Supreme Court rulings expanding presidential immunity, what actions should still clearly qualify as criminal or impeachable offenses?
When I see Donald Trump enriching himself to the extent that he is enriching himself and his family through his dealings in our government, when I see Donald Trump stealing $10 billion from the U.S. taxpayers so that he can spend it on the Board of Peace, I think those things are overt in their criminality and that we should be able to call those what they are. I think that we need a level of accountability to come back into our government, but that presupposes that regardless of what your political party is, that you will hold your own accountable. And that's sorely lacking right now. We are seeing executive branch overreach on everything from how ICE is deployed in our cities to the accountability that happens when those ICE officers murder U.S. citizens. If it is as simple as the President of the United States of America labeling someone a domestic terrorist with no evidence, and then more or less absolving their killers of any wrongdoing, then I think you see that overtly as a problem. And so I think that the standard is as simple as the standard ever was. Is if a majority of our government believes that you are acting outside of the bounds of your constitutional duties, then you should be subject to impeachment. Where that is short-circuited is the partisanship and how it is deployed in our government and how it shields people like Donald Trump from accountability.
I believe strongly in accountability for anyone, whether they are the president or just an average citizen like the rest of us. I think that accountability is the cornerstone to having a government that is working for the rest of us. That said, I don't believe that we should use the legal system as the way to attack people. I've got a friend, and we were just discussing this topic a little bit, and he brought up the point that some of the legal actions against Donald Trump seem to be more of just a political attack rather than an actual attack. And I don't believe that we should be doing that sort of thing. I don't think the legal system should be a tool to attack other people. However, I also think that no one is above the law.
So the last impeachment proceedings cost the U.S. taxpayers $40 million. And it took like 2 months of time and ended up not coming to the conclusion that the majority of the House at that time wanted. When you're looking at these things, currently the Republicans have the majority. There's no way in the House that they would impeach Donald Trump unless he had an impeachable offense where people would come out and say, yeah, this is impeachable. Should the Republicans lose the midterm elections, one of the first concerns is that we're going to go through another impeachment proceeding. Whether that passes or doesn't pass by majority, that's going to be up for debate. But it shouldn't be weaponized. It takes a ton of resources and a ton of time away from issues that we're actually facing in this country and things that we need to be spending money on. I would love to have $40 million invested in our communities. We need the money. We need the help. So when you're looking at these factors, it's fun to play political games when you don't have to pay the bill. It's fun to file lawsuits against people when they can't afford to defend themselves. But it's not fun for the taxpayers that have to keep funneling these processes or policies through or paying for them. And I think that that's one of the concerns that we need to have. We need to have civil discourse. We need to talk about things. The actions of one person, if they're criminal, they can face impeachment. But I think that right now you don't have that support, at least from the Republican side yet, to impeach Donald Trump for anything he's done.
So this question is exactly what I'm talking about when I say that Supreme Court justices are twisting themselves into knot to give this president more power. I think that Supreme Court handling was, that did not do the American people any favors. I understand that as the President of the United States of America, that you need to be able to make some decisions that are difficult and people could try to, you need some kind of immunities for some of those situations. However, the case that we have now is that you have an individual that is continuing to test the waters in every way possible to skirt or work outside the Constitution of the United States. And hopefully with this next midterm elections, we're able to take control back of the House or the Senate or both as Democrats and get a guardrail back up on our democracy. Thank you.
Zebulon. This district borders Canada. If elected, what steps would you take to strengthen relations with Canada and rebuild other U.S. alliances?
I think the tariffs that were in place on so many of our allies was completely unnecessary. It makes no sense for us to start economic strife with our allies, people who we've been working with for so long. First, I'd like to get rid of any tariffs that are not there for a valid reason. Tariffs are a tool that you can use in the right circumstance, but they're not a blunt weapon. And I think it's going to take work and it's going to take time to rebuild the trust and the relationships that we've had with some of these countries, but I think we can do it.
Well, I can tell you one thing, if I was in Congress right now, I'd make sure I'd get the funding to be able to pay our customs and border protection agents that are currently sitting at the SUE right now, watching vehicles go through and making sure the shipping lanes are open and making sure all the ice bridges are open and dealing with domestic transportation and commerce that goes through the locks in those areas. But I'm not. I actually called up there last week and tried to get a tour, but unfortunately only congressional members are allowed to, and you actually have to call Washington, D.C. and go through the process. But I did have a really good conversation with some of those individuals. Actually, some of them reached out to my campaign. Canada is really important. It's important strategically. If we don't have an alliance with them, it opens the door for other nations to come in, potentially build defense bases that border us and put us in harm's way. One of the big concerns is the expansion of BRICS, which includes China and India. China could be a major problem, a major threat in this region. We've already seen their expansion in Central and South America. But I think one of the things that we need to look at is how do we open the dialogue with Canada to make it fair for us to have trade agreements, again, that are functional and beneficial for both countries? How do we have partnership agreements that allow us to bring individuals from Canada who want to work here, and maybe people who are from the United States seeking employment elsewhere to work there, and some cross-border, cross-country
In regards to Canada, I think, you could look at Mexico as well, but with Canada, look at what's happening. We were talking a little bit about housing and the way that a home ownership is becoming unaffordable for people in our district. We get a lot of lumber from Canada. I do construction on the side, and I watched as the price of a 2x4 doubled. And you can't even plan or budget or plan for your small business future when you have these uncontrolled tariffs going on, and these other countries, they don't know how to react. What it looks like is if you come and kiss the ring of our benevolent president, then you will get a better tariff rate. So he's using tariffs as a political tool to reward and punish other countries around them for his own personal gain. So, trust has been broken with, one of our best trading partners and a defensive country in the Americas. So, I don't know what the final answer is to that, but we've done a lot of damage at this point, and once trust is broken, it's hard to get back.
An individual member of the House has limited capabilities in terms of acting in terms of diplomacy between nations. But what you can do is you can use your platform and act as a sort of envoy to our Canadian brothers and sisters and speak to them, at least for your values. And I think that's important for somebody who's representing Northern Michigan in Congress, because we have such a close cultural connection to our Canadian brothers and sisters to the north. But one thing I would say is, speaking on, say, NAFTA, is I believe that rather than having agreements in place that ensure that Canadian or American or Mexican corporations can continually exploit the working class of America, the working class of Canada, the working class of Mexico, that should be an unacceptable situation. That all of our trade agreements should be based around the shared prosperity of our working classes. That means that we should ensure that we have wage parity between us and our Mexican brothers and sisters to make sure that they do not have our jobs exported from America to Mexico just so that we can exploit them harder and then create conditions in our lives where we are constantly having to remove workers' rights and privileges here in order to compete. And so first and foremost, I think it's about understanding that our relationship with Canada and Mexico should be contingent on a working class movement.
Okay, Justin, since President Trump's imposed tariffs were ruled unlawful and the costs were ultimately paid by American consumers, what should be done with that revenue now?
Well, I think companies and corporations are going to try to get refunds on those tariffs, but here's the unfortunate perspective. We, as the consumers, pay those tariffs and the increase in pricing. And I've never really been a huge fan of tariffs, mainly because it just increases the cost. I know that that's not really popular in terms of the economic plans right now in our country, especially on my party lines, but the concern has always been whether or not there would be legal and then what would happen to the money. And I can tell you this much, I know that, everybody that raised their prices to accommodate for that isn't gonna be calling me on the phone and be like, hey, Justin, you paid a lot of that tariff money, and the 20% or 30% that we increase your prices, we're gonna give you a kickback. So, it's unfortunate that we're in this position. We're trying to save money in our homes, especially in our district, and it looks like corporations are gonna capitalize on the tariff recall. So
They can start sending out the rebate checks immediately to the individuals in this room and across our district. Let's pay us first instead of paying the corporations and foreign governments or however that money's going to go. usually the writing's on the wall. It's never going to trickle down to us. So my suggestion is figure out what the number is going to be and reinvest that back into the citizens of the United States that paid for those tariffs. It's us through our consumer buying. We paid extra. We should be getting something back. I'm sure they could probably go through our receipts. All right.
The sheer scale of it is impossible to reimburse the American people under the system that we have right now. I think we need a bill in Congress that should be passed by both chambers and signed into law that guarantees that that money is dispersed in the way of a stimulus check to the American public, a reimbursement at scale to the American public for the regressive tax that they paid through those tariffs. Because the reality is this, is that those corporations dating back to COVID and beyond, way back, every single time that there is an increase in cost inputs, they recuperate those inputs plus some. So if they were, if a lumber company is importing at a 25% tariff, I guarantee you that they increased their prices on lumber 30, 35%. They've been taken care of. Who isn't taken care of as part of that is the American consumer. And so we need a bill that not only guarantees that the amount of money that was taken by our government from the American consumer returns to the American consumer rather than those corporations who have already benefited, is that we need to include safeguards to guarantee that the president cannot capriciously apply tariffs in the future. I think we need to have severe restrictions on tariffs based on this example, and that Congress should ultimately have decision-making powers in that tariff process.
I would love to see, stimulus checks come to us. I don't have high expectations for that to happen, but I'd love to see it. My expectation is that the refunds that are given out to corporations, we're going to have to hope and, hope that those corporations are kind enough to spread the wealth within their company to their workers. I don't expect to see that happen either. There are things you can do if you know that your company is getting a lot of money back. You do have a voice within your own little system. There are things you can do. There are things you can say. You can use your voice. I do hope, like Kyle was saying, that we put systems in place so that this doesn't happen again. And hopefully we avoid these issues going forward.
All right, so now closing remarks. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for their remarks. So I'm going to start with you, Wayne.
I'm not running for Congress because I need a job. And I'm not running for Congress simply to try to move the bar in our district. I'm running for Congress to flip this congressional seat blue and get a guardrail back up on our democracy. But I can't do it alone. We're up against billionaires and super PACs and all the money that has entered our political system since Citizens United. But I think we have something even better now. We have people who are ready to stand up and fight for Michigan's future. So if you're interested in volunteering for my campaign, I welcome you. If you want to make a financial contribution, I thank you. I'm asking you for your vote so that together we can defend democracy, we can fight for everyday hardworking Americans, and we can restore the promises of America for our loved ones. And for everybody here and everybody across this district, and for anybody who's ever been told they can't have a fair shot at the American dream. Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think it's been a great forum. I think the questions were really excellent, and I hope that we all answer them to the best of our abilities. I know I tried my damnedest. Ultimately, I'm running for two reasons. Because I want my neighbors' needs met. I want their lives improved drastically so, and I'm willing to do so in Congress. I also want the violence of our government to be checked. That I no longer want to see my taxpayer dollars going to fund death abroad. And those two things are the things that I'm always going to fight for. In me, you will see a candidate who has sworn off any AIPAC money, who has called Israel's genocide in Gaza exactly what it is. And on the other side, in Jack Bergman, we have somebody who has exported our dollars to a foreign nation to perpetrate that genocide and speaks so glowingly of that nation. And then now we are seeing our brave American men and women potentially being deployed again in another illegal forever war abroad. So I hope that you support anti-war candidates. I hope you support America First candidates. And I hope that you consider myself among those. Because ultimately, my goal is to see that your needs are met, and I see that there's an inextricable link between our spending abroad and our basic needs being met at home.
Firstly, thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you for the volunteers for making this conversation possible. I'm truly excited about this campaign. I believe the United States is capable of so much. We're a country of innovation, we're a country of diversity, and we're a country built on the idea that the government works for its people. When we have leadership that listens, operates transparently, and stays true to the people it represents, we can shift away from division and towards solutions. I'm running as I'm running as an independent because my loyalty belongs to the people of this district, not to any party leadership or outside interests. That's the commitment that I'm making to you. No party, just people.
They always save the best for last. One of the things that I want to say is I want to congratulate each and every one of you tonight. You did it. Hour and 37 minutes you went without bickering and complaining with each other or saying anything crazy that would have stopped this debate. We didn't have to get the sergeant of arms in here to separate us. And why I'm congratulating you is you just showed that it can be done. We didn't have to yell and scream or try to prove points or try to say that our information is more important or try to show that our moral value or moral high ground is better than someone else's. We just sat in a room, we listened, we had a conversation, we were civil. And that's you. We've seen each other now a few times. We've been able to have conversations that are off the record and we've gotten to know each other. I'm actually happy that they come and they're willing to have conversations. It's something that I really think we can grow on and build on in this district. It's time to have discussions. It's time to have meaningful dialogue with each other. And I hope tonight sets that tone for this county. I hope that you guys continue to work together. I know that Tracy, she's a great voice for our party, and I hope that Tracy, you continue to work with them in the community. Thank you so much for your time.
I want to participate and get home safely, drive home safely, watch for the deer. My car's getting. There will be a post-quorum party at La Cabana at 2110 10th Street. and everyone pays for their own order. So thank you all again for coming, and be careful going.
You might want to tell them to wait.
Elaine Meyer is in here. She'll do whatever the other people have picked. Who's electrical? Kieran. Lisa. You're welcome to go over there and pick whichever short price you want. The one that says graduate is graduate, so don't be messing. Sherry left already, she'll get this later. Here. There's 1, 2, 3, and 1 more. Those 3, we're done.